it says we are live. Woohoo!
Willkommen. This ist das Trampled Underfoot podcast.
Is it dirty or das?
Das. The.
Das?
Yeah, das.
Okay.
Wouldn't das be because it's the Trampled Underfoot podcast?
Well, dirty and das, all three of those are the. It's feminine, masculine, and neutral.
Ich bin, or ish bin.
Well, it depends on where you are because most of Germany it's ich, but where we were stationed it's ish. That's the Rhineland-Pfalz accent.
Yeah, there's a big difference. I remember the reason I picked up on all these things is because I remember working in the Everglades
Hmm.
and having a lot of contact with a lot of people from so many different parts around the world, including Germany, like a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and they were having a conversation over the difference between East Germans and West Germans, and
Hmm.
that who says that? Who says ick? And they were like doing all that kind of stuff. I was viewing insider fighting or cultural little tit for tats
Hmm.
while observing them, and I was like, oh crap, this is another layer of more people, kind of like the North and South or Coca
Hmm.
soda or what do you call it, pop or this.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of that goes on, but it's even deeper than that. It's weirder because ich in the Dutch language is the same as ich or ish, but it is ik, and it gets weirder than that because Dutch is a derivative of German, but Germans don't say German; they say Deutsch, which means Dutch.
No, Deutsch means German.
Deutsch means Dutch. They don't call themselves German.
No, the Germans. Are you saying the Germans call themselves Dutch?
Yes. Well, they call themselves Deutsch.
Yeah,
And
which is
Deutsch,
German.
but the literal translation of Deutsch is Dutch.
I didn't know that. I thought that. No, I see. Hold on. I'm not trying to, but I'm curious. So, for Germans,
Hmm.
since time immortal,
Hmm.
when you see the documents and such,
Hmm.
it doesn't say, "Hey, we're talking. This book is in German," and so you see Deutsch.
Hmm.
It's my understanding up until now, and we'll see that Deutsch is literally German, and the issue in the United States and the early settlers and such in Pennsylvania, like we've talked about before,
Hmm.
was an issue where the Dutch people or the German people would say Deutsch,
Hmm.
and then the other people, like English people and such, would think, oh, they're saying they're Deutsch, so that means they're Dutch, and so then you end up with the Dutch what you call it.
Yeah, right. But what I'm getting at is in Germany they don't call themselves German. They call themselves Deutsch. But they call people from the Netherlands Nederlanders, but you ask what language they speak, they say Deutsch.
Well, it is all the same thing, or not really,
Well,
but it's all
yeah,
connected.
it is connected. The only time you'll hear a German saying the word German is when they're talking about the Germanic tribes, and they do call them Germanisch. So, but the Deutsche Volk, the German people, call themselves Deutsch, but they also call the language the Netherlanders speak Deutsch, and it is Dutch. That's what the word Deutsch actually means. To throw this into a little bit more of a spin, it's a dialect of German is spoken in Switzerland. but they don't call it Switzerland. It's Helvetica, Confederación Helvetica. It's absolutely nothing to do with anything Swiss. We call it Swiss, but they don't call it Swiss there.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like, let me throw this at you in those terms of what you call it, we call it, they call
Hmm.
it, some other people might not, this sort of thing.
Hmm.
You do know, obviously, that Spain is España.
España, yeah,
So they wouldn't, in their minds, think in terms of saying Spain, which is the English way
right.
to say it. Um, but how about in the reverse, them towards the United States?
Hmm.
Do you know that one?
I'm gonna say Americano, but but I don't know that that's the case because I know that there's a little bit of a, I won't say spite in us calling ourselves Americans because you have North and South America. We're all Americans when you get down to it.
Right.
But we chose to call ourselves the Americans like we're the only ones. I know there's a
Right.
little bit of that attitude in Germany, but and a little bit of that in France, some in the UK, but I really don't know about Spain. I don't know if they think that or what.
So they it so the two things are used, but the one so they will say Americanos,
Hmm.
but that implies there's overlap, just like the
Hmm.
German or Deutsch
Hmm.
situation, where you
Right,
have different groups
right.
and that wording overlaps. It's sort of the same thing with America or
Hmm.
the Americas, and that kind of situation. It's sort of like when I've ever mentioned to a Canadian that, hey, you're American, you know that, right? The
Hmm.
context, it's very offensive to them for some reason, or
Yeah.
not for some reason. I know exactly why, but depending on the context that you put it in,
Hmm.
they're no less Americans than we are
Right.
by any stretch of the imagination,
Hmm.
by any stretch, based on the geographic explanation of the thing
Right.
continentally.
Right.
Um, but people have different, what do you call it? The way they define it and stuff. Anyways, the Spanish will say that,
Hmm.
but more precisely, what you and I are,
Hmm.
and many of our buddies in the chat are, for them, are estadounidenses,
Okay. Estadounidenses. Okay.
which is
Yeah,
basically
because
United States
right
citizen.
when we were over in Europe, some people said I'm American. I would say I'm from the US. And folks knew exactly what I meant. But that whole American thing, and that's where I'm getting a lot of this from is when we get um, as in the army, you go through what they call German when you first get over there. And that was talking with my teacher. They give you a little bit of German, you learn a little bit about the customs, a little bit about the laws. You know, it's illegal to turn right on a red, no matter if you're clear or not, and all that other good stuff. Um, if you're sitting at a table for four and it's just you, don't be surprised if three people come sit down with you. They'll ask, but it's very common to share tables with total strangers. It's just because there isn't that much room and they don't see any sense in three people wanting to sit down to eat and you've got a table for four and there's one guy sitting there. They don't see any sense in wasting that table. Just go.
But here, you know what that is? I know that you know,
Mm-hmm.
because we that would be the equivalent to an all out invasion.
Oh yeah.
If
Oh
somebody,
yeah.
some person off the street come and sit in my on my in table, I
Mm-hmm.
would be like, dude, do you want to take a picture because it's gonna
Mm-hmm.
last longer?
Well, it's but they do ask. They'll come up and they'll ask, "Ist hier frei? Is this free? Is this open?"
Yeah.
Because they don't know. You might be waiting on somebody, and you say, "Yeah, it's frei," or "Nee, it's besetzt." No, it's taken, and they go, "Oh, okay," and off they go. But It is very common to be there. Now, if it's a two people there and you got the candles and it's the romantic thing, they'll leave you. They don't mess with
So in
that.
that situation, a soccer team after a game would not come in and say, "It's Fry," and they all jump up on you and they're sitting on your girlfriend, and say, that won't happen then.
I won't say it won't happen, but it's pretty uncommon. But their whole attitude toward privacy is completely different over there. It is perfectly normal and acceptable to them to be, sitting in a seat on a bus and somebody two seats over is just looking at you, checking out your shirt, your t-shirt, and just, oh, he wears black rimmed glasses. That's cool.
That
Yeah.
doesn't work for
And
me.
that's common.
That does not work for me.
That's not considered an invasion of privacy. If you say something to them, that's considered an invasion of privacy.
If
A,
they ever did that,
a touch is considered an invasion of privacy. But Ge- Germans are massive people watchers and they're very, very fashion conscious.
I'm a girl
So,
watcher.
exactly. If they see, oh, you've got that t-shirt on. That's a pretty cool t-shirt. Well, what's he wearing with the shirt? Okay, he's got blue jeans. He doesn't have his cuffs rolled up. And okay, what kind of boots are those? They're very, very conscious of that. All by law, all of the stores are closed on Sunday, except for small convenience stores that are with gas stations. They're allowed to be open. But you can't go in. You tell them what you want, and they have one of those little push drawers like the bank, the drive up at the bank, and they'll put it in that and, sell it to you that way. You can't come into the store. But downtown is packed with people just sitting around, walking around, just watching people, seeing what they're wearing, how they're dressing. Very fashion conscious.
For
It's weird.
Americans,
Mhm,
and I feel that I can confidently. I mean, there are variations like what you talked about. There are moments of connection between Americans in terms of if you're
mhm,
at the shopping at a shopping or at a restaurant, there
mhm.
is a polite exchange, this and that, but there's none of
Sure.
that stuff, and there's none of that. I mean, you don't expect somebody to park their butt in where you're eating. I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, that would be um highly uncomfortable.
Now, that does lead to, you know, exchanges and people talking and meeting. That happened to us. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember where we were. We were down south in Germany and some folks sat down at our table and next thing you know, we're just having this nice old discussion in my broken German and their broken English, but we just had an absolutely great discussion and it was a lot of fun. I don't remember who provoked it, who started it, but the only thing that I can remember is this guy made aluminum windows. For some reason, that's all I remember was that was the business he was in. He made aluminum windows, but he looked like a doctor for some reason.
So talking about this language thing and
Hmm.
and even habits and so on and so forth. Um, I mentioned estadounidense
Hmm.
in reference to from Spanish to English. That would be the more
Hmm.
precision wording
Yeah.
because it identifies United States citizens or
Hmm.
Americans
Yeah.
in the context of their specific geographic location. But if you were to say, because it depends, if you're talking politics,
Hmm.
they could just refer to Americans, and then
Yeah.
based on all things politically and so on, or just cultural stuff. But if
Sure.
but detailed would be saying estadounidenses,
Hmm.
um, and I've seen maps online and stuff where
Hmm.
they do the same thing. How is America actually pronounced in the different languages across Europe? And then you'll see the name. Have you ever seen
Yeah.
those?
Yeah.
And it's freaking, some nations just are very exact, and
Mhm.
others are quite slightly or like weird, like
Mhm.
where we wouldn't necessarily like pick up on what the heck.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that
Well, it's also
between
in
language.
how they may pronounce certain things the same way we do, but they'll spell it different because of their language and their alphabet system. Like for instance, Moscow. We spell it Moscow. Over in Germany, they spell it Moskau
Yeah.
because that's what makes those sounds. That's their spelling for those sounds. So that can get confusing every once in a while as well.
Yeah, I actually was using. I've been continuing using AI, and I did touch upon these issues
Hmm.
with language and so on, and and I started inquiring about Hispanic and the way we use it in the United States, but
Hmm.
actually not Hispanic, Latino.
Hmm.
And I asked it, why do we have Latino and Hispanic? Latino is Spanish for Latin,
Hmm.
and Hispanic is English for Hispano. So so in English or in the United States, we say, "Oh well, they're Hispanic," which is an English reference to Hispano.
Hmm.
But when they say, "Oh, he's Latino," they're actually using a Spanish word that actually means Latin.
Okay.
So you're either Hispano or Latino,
Hmm.
or you're Hispanic or Latin.
Okay.
And that frames it in a, because what happens is, because I was inquiring of all these things, because what happens is that there's a reference to Latin
Hmm.
anciently uh, for Rome, for the Romans,
Yeah.
through Spain and then into the Americas. But what we pick up on average in the United States is that Latino happens to be, instead of a cultural umbrella,
Yeah.
a different type of category that informs, whether ethnicity or race or any of these things. It homogenizes the whole group of
Right.
people. And so I was asking it this, and we went through the whole thing. And but then I said to it, but in reality, I hit all those categories perfectly. Because in fact, I told them all the regular things, but then I said, I was Italian ancestry, which is the root of Latin. But this, oh yes, that makes sense. The AI said and this and that. But the lingering issue is this consideration of Latino as its own group when it's comprised of so many different groups with different variations of backgrounds and so on. So, like we've discussed in the past,
Hmm.
and I find that it's kind of like if we were to call people that derive from England or use the English language
Hmm.
English. So it would be like saying the Jamaicans and the Bahamians,
Hmm.
they're English. This
Yeah.
is the English ethnicity.
Okay.
Calling Hispanics in the United States the way they do
Hmm.
would be the equivalent, if you flipped it on its upside down, as calling people in the Caribbean that speak English.
Okay. I see. Yeah. From what I understood, in fact, we had this discussion before. I thought Hispanic was the language and Latino was the person.
No, Hispanic. So the problem with Hispanic is and Latino is that Hispanic and Latino are the same thing, but they overlap. It's pointing to culture and language.
Yeah, understood. That's what I meant. The Latino. I'm trying to remember how it went.
It's a person from
Hmm.
Spanish
Yes,
origins,
that's what I meant.
but
Yes.
but what I'm saying is that Latino.
Hmm.
So, like for instance, you would you could easily call a person from South America
Mhm.
a Latin
Yeah.
because it's the same
Latino.
difference.
Yeah.
No, not Latino. Well, yeah,
Mhm.
that's what we do call,
Mhm.
but the actual English version of that
Mhm.
is Latin. These are
Well,
Latin,
yeah.
but Latino
Mhm.
distances from the concept of what Latin is, because that's what they're saying. That's what the
Mhm.
word is, which means derived from Roman language,
Mhm.
or actually literally ancient Roman language, the one that's used in the church and still, there's vulgar Latin and all that. But the point that I'm making is that you can use either or, but it's a broad umbrella, sort of like saying these are English people, and then pointing to people off the coast of Costa Rica that were of African origin, but were settled there by the British, and they still to this day speak English. They would then be English. Oh, those Costa Ricans are English, of the English ethnicity. It's the same thing, because what they do. What I'm getting at is that the precision of it creates or facilitates the ability for people to umbrella package this group as a something less specific than what it's kind of like Germany. The Dutch, the Germans, Switzerland, all those countries that intermingle but are separate. We don't look at them as um, the same,
Mhm.
but they have overlaps, like the Dutch thing that you were saying. So
Yeah.
it's kind of this. That's why I was connecting it. There's sort of
Mhm.
that.
Well,
So you,
the thing to remember is that Germany, in a grand scheme of things, is relatively new because it didn't become Germany until the first Kaiser. It was a bunch of city states. You had Prussia, which was different from Bavaria, which was different from Dalmatia. I mean, you had all these different small city states, and they all eventually came together and formed what is Germany.
yeah,
But it was fairly recently. So,
yeah.
and much like, well, Spain went through the same thing, but much earlier than Germany did. So it was either the end of the 1800s or the very beginning of the 1900s that happened.
I think the new, like the official Spanish state
Hmm.
started sometime in the 1800s. Believe it or not, not anciently.
I thought
Um,
it. Well, no, I thought it was like the 16 or 1700s after the after reclaiming from the
it was
Moors.
it was unified in 1495
Hmm.
or somewhere thereabouts, right
Yeah,
before the
that's
Age
what I
of
thought.
Discovery.
Hmm.
But when it became a country in totality, because what it was regions,
Yeah.
just like Germany,
Hmm.
and then in recent times, in the past century, it became various autonomous communities, kind of like
Hmm.
states. So you have Cantabria, that's its own group of people. Like you don't say that a Cantabrian is the same as someone from Barcelona.
Yeah.
Like it's just because you have
Yeah.
mountains in between and people, but in a way, they're all the same people if you look at it broadly. Like Germany, and its surrounding neighbor, there's connections,
Yeah.
but then
But there
there's
are
the
also cultural differences and regional differences as well.
and the same applies for South America.
Hmm. Well,
And
it's
so
and it's the same thing with us here because your culture there in Florida, just by virtue of you being on this in the southeast, is completely different from the culture up here in the Pacific Northwest. And that's simply because of regional geographic things, you know.
yeah, and cultural things too.
Hmm.
Obviously, if you look at, I mean, so Mark Saunders came down
Hmm.
from where he lives, and he's been here various times,
Hmm.
and we went out to eat and this and that. I was imagining how, because over here the dominance is Spanish in terms of culture and this and that, but
Sure.
that can be a little bit of an overstatement or understatement depending, because like a person like Mark Saunders that isn't necessarily surrounded by Latin culture or Hispanic culture or Caribbean culture, those are all categories
Mhm.
where this would fit. It's also American culture because you have generations absorbing American culture, which is a
Sure.
mix of other cultures, but there's themes that are kind of so it's a
Right.
homogenized thing. But I was looking at when Mark was here, and we talked all sorts of stuff, but we didn't touch on that necessarily. Um, from his perspective, how culturally different does he perceive it? I should have asked him and stuff, but we had other things to talk about. Um, I thought about that because there's a lot of Spanish that I take for granted
Mhm.
completely, but I imagine someone like yourself living out west in the Northwest, if you were to relocate here, other than the temperature, or I'll say it this way, when it comes to mechanical things,
Mhm.
like every day back and forth and this and that, other than the inconvenience of maybe it's hot and stuff like just whatever the
Mhm.
inconvenience is, everything else is, I don't want to say everything else, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Mhm.
It's like it's like if you were to move to New York City or Chicago, there's a baseline Americanness, but
Mhm.
it's informed by um, Chinese culture, Italian,
Mhm.
Jewish culture. So it's kind of a shift, but you still have a baseline fabric type thing that
Yeah.
you're walking around in.
Well, you're influenced by by the various cultures that have settled the area, but you're also influenced by the resources of that area. So
Yeah,
I don't know, you might, because you're right there on the ocean. But up here, you see a lot of salmon, a lot of trout in grocery stores, and you get it at restaurants. Um, a lot of fish, uh, cold water fish, because it's come down straight down from the Arctic. We don't swim in the ocean here. Swimming in the ocean here is a punishment because the water's, you know, high 40s, low 50s. It's cold.
yeah, it's not a good idea.
No. In fact, you got to get way down south in Southern California before it's even bearable.
I even
You know,
tried it there,
hmm
and it
it's
wasn't good for me.
still pretty cold. Yeah.
No, like super cold.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Well, now we're 800 miles to the north of that. Imagine how cold it is up here, you know.
Yeah,
So, a lot of the ingredients, I don't know anything about Caribbean food. So, a lot of the ingredients that they have down there, that you have down there, that you're used to, we just don't have here. I'm 64 years old. I've never eaten a plantain in my life. Wouldn't know how to prepare it. I might love it. I just don't know. Just have never been exposed to it. So, but I'm sure there's things up here that you've never had either, simply because they don't grow there or they're not native to that area. So we have that as well. We have a lot of Asian influence out here because where the East Coast, and I'm talking the Northeast up around New York and what have you, they had a huge influx from Western Europe, a lot of Irish, a lot of English, a lot of Germans, and they settled in various areas there. We had a lot of Asians that came here and did the same things, railroad workers and loggers, mill operators, things like that. We have also, and we still to this day have large Asian populations. Um, there are pockets of Polynesian populations, which just blows my mind because it's too damn cold for most Polynesians here. That's just all there is to it. But we also have a lot of German, not Swiss, Swedish, Norwegian out here as well. So it just depends on the people who were settling and bringing their culture with them, and it's kind of a mismatch of that plus the Native Americans that were here first.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
there's it's strange how the cultures form region by region. So I might be completely a fish out of water in Miami, but I think you would be, depending upon where we went, you would be equally fish out of water here until you got a bit used to it, you know.
The only thing I can equate it with, because it's the furthest west I've gone, um, was California,
Hmm.
and I felt naturally at home for some reason
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, in San Francisco, all of it,
Hmm.
other than the temperature change, and yes, there was various cultural changes,
Hmm.
but the thing about big cities, because I was in Chicago too,
Hmm.
you become just another number.
Yep. Yep.
Now, when I was in smaller towns, there's more wiggle room and stuff, and so smaller places like even just 12 to 15 miles west of here, there's a whole society out there,
Yeah. It's
and
a whole nother world.
it's a whole nother world, and but even they are affected by Miami. So
Well,
those
yeah.
people out there, because where do they get all their goods? I mean, long term,
Hmm.
they have to go to all the, and so they come into the city and this and that. But the influence hopping that occurs
Yeah.
just here in this area, and you have your pockets and this and that, but it's pretty savage. It's pretty.
Hmm.
But the thing about us in the United States is that, and I don't understand why people don't get it, or some people don't, but that we have all this mixing of cultures and trading of cultures and back and forth that does create what this is. That's how come we have an idea of what New York is.
Hmm.
I mean, I've been to New York, not the city, but whatever. I mean, even that, you go
Hmm.
to upstate New York, you might as well be in the country.
Well, you are in the country.
Well, but I'm saying like,
Hmm.
rural people. I mean, you are, but
Yeah.
the point is that even within, because you wouldn't think of um, New York, this hustle and bustle, which it is, but that's the city,
Hmm.
and there's other cities, but
Hmm.
in its surroundings, you have um, localities that are, you know,
Little small towns.
more
Yeah.
quaint, this and that, and so just by virtue of that, we're an example of literally um, a freaking melting pot.
Yeah. You you really can't define a state by its biggest city because you miss so much. You know, um, I imagine in Florida, Miami has a completely different feel than if you went to, say, Tampa or Orlando. And I'm not talking about Disneyland, I'm talking about the city of Orlando, or Jacksonville. I would imagine it's completely different than Miami, just by virtue of different people and different population. Well, it's the same thing here. You can't really define Washington by Seattle. You can't define Oregon by Portland, and you can't define California by Los Angeles or San Francisco because you miss so much. People in Southern California, not down in the LA basin or Orange County or San Diego, but down in the Southern California deserts are completely different people. And they may be just 60 miles away. But the whole feeling, the whole culture, the whole attitude is completely different. Then you get
Yeah.
up here, Northern California, up near Wairika, they're closer to Oregonians than they are Californians. It's a different mentality, it's a different thought process, and it's small town, real
There's
small town.
there's overlap because people's
Mhm.
back and forth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, true.
you'll have a family,
Mhm.
and this is repeated like indefinitely. You'll have families where you'll have one sort of ethnic origin, be it Scottish or be it whatever
Mhm.
Jewish, and then you'll have a couple of um, Irish people or
Mhm.
um, Mexican people or any other number of combinations. Cubans with Jews, as an example here. In my
Mhm.
family, there's certain cousins that have ties to other groups from. But if you multiply that across millions of people and like the years that
Yeah.
America has, we have a salad of
Oh
you know
yeah.
crossing influences,
Mhm.
and that is also repeated not only here. I think Canada also is something like that in a certain way, but so is
Yeah.
South America.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Argentina is different from Brazil as we are from Italy. They're just completely different. Different languages, different cultures, different trends, different norms. I mean, yeah, for sure.
yeah, I've been thinking of all those sort of things in terms of my family journey and myself, and in a sense, it's interesting because I have all these reference points: Cuba, the Canary Islands, Andalusia, Cantabria, Italy, in my background. But on top of that, I'm a first generation American.
Yeah.
So it's like I told in this whole of different stuff with me, but it it's a weird thing because um and then it's funny because fellow Cubans
Hmm.
will have totally different stories than
Hmm.
me in terms of that.
Sure.
And like, so the only thing that would tie is the historical notion of what happened with Cuba and this and that and stuff. But it's just layers and layers of all these things and stuff. And with language too, going back to
Hmm.
the Deutsch.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
it's an incredible thing to think about the way the languages and the languages overlap.
yeah, they do. But because they influence one another. Now, you get some pretty drastic changes in Europe. Spanish is not like French. French is not like German. Neither of them are like English. But you have some similarities because, like, you have German, then you have Dutch, but then you go across the water, they're nothing like Swedish or Norwegian, So there are dramatic differences, and that's based on the tribal separations that were happening back in the day.
But there's not differences in certain ways too. There are differences that are huge, but like, so the root of Spanish is the same root of Portuguese and
Hmm.
French,
Italian and
Italian, Romanian,
yeah,
which is the Latin, which is what we were talking about, Latino, Latin, this and that. Um, but English borrows from it greatly.
yeah, they borrows from all of them.
Yeah, so it's overlap in that sense too.
Hmm.
And I cannot understand clearly Portuguese. I'm easier to understand an Italian person
I was
speaking.
gonna ask you exactly this question. If you hear people speaking in Portuguese, can you understand, or people speaking in Italian, can you understand them?
It's as if you were talking to someone and they were speaking Pig Latin.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? It's not that that's what it is. I'm just saying
Hmm.
that from my the word usage, you'll
Hmm.
understand certain words, and then the whole thing collapses
Yeah. When
because
I was stationed over Germany, my platoon sergeant was from Puerto Rico, and they used to go to Italy a lot. And he said it was similar enough that he could follow a conversation and get what he wanted. If he wanted to go to a restaurant, he could get to a restaurant. If he was looking for a certain place, a certain address, he could get there.
Yeah,
He said, but it's just different enough to where you're kind of second guessing yourself a lot.
yeah. You can hear the words because they all derive from the same thing, from Italy,
Hmm.
from the Romans. You can hear where it makes sense, but you do sort of, because I've tried, and you're like, that could go any direction. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? So
yeah.
and French, which does have strong ties, it also borrows from German. So
Some
you have a
things,
mix.
yes.
Well, French is not just
Hmm.
Latin. No.
No, it borrows some things from German, but it's the way they pronounce their letters, their diphthongs, and their vowel sounds. It have taken that root from German, but it's gone. You know,
Yeah. You
it
can't
it,
you
it
can't
you can't tell that it was German unless you see it written down. Then you could say, okay, that was German. You know.
yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I was perusing the interwebs,
Mm-hmm.
and I was looking at Sweetwater history.
Mm-hmm.
Um like old Sweetwater history.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a sheriff here back in the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
and just interesting history and stuff, where the bar that's no longer here, just across one block away, that used to be there
Mm-hmm.
from my house, that used to be the go-to place after hours where everything else closed in Miami, and
Mm-hmm.
people would go there to get drunk and they'd get into fights. It was like ruckus and this and that.
Mm-hmm.
So Sweetwater was the place that people would go. But in any event, it just so happens that that guy retired, and either him, his son, or both, at some point, they also owned a bar deep in the Everglades. And there's a photo of it with him standing in front of it. And there's nothing there left now except the name place.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to get there, because that was another place people would go to have a whole good time
Mm-hmm.
outside of the eye of the law.
Yeah.
And you go 20 some odd miles, and then you cut in, and you're in the middle of the Everglades, like just a solitary screwed up road. You just keep going, and like just going and going and going, and then all of a sudden you arrive at this little shack,
Mm-hmm.
and they serve cold beer and like certain food, and it's just a shack, and you go, and they
Mm-hmm.
had music. And I was reading on all that the whole story and this and that. In any event, Miami, or Sweetwater, but Miami too, had all these histories prior to the histories that take place for me and my family.
Sure.
And and I explored it. I have explored it in the past, but I found this thing which was freaking great. And it links to other friends of mine
Mm-hmm.
that were here that don't have a Cuban background or anything like that. Um, and those people are the minority now. I've told you before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those stories are worth preserving and keeping, because a lot of those people moved out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was called the White Flight,
Yeah.
um, because once the Cubans set anchor here, they started to buy up a lot of stuff
Mm-hmm.
and get into all sorts of parts of the, like, they grew, they just multiplied
Mm-hmm.
and grew and this and that.
Built businesses and got involved in local politics and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
Mm-hmm.
but so what I'm getting at is that these histories can get lost.
Sure can.
And these histories are bridges to people in the present. And there's people that preserve it and stuff, like I'm part of certain groups and this and that.
Hmm.
Um, so it's just fascinating to appreciate history like that and to understand the connections. Because I grew up in a world where those two groups
Hmm.
were together at the same time here in Sweetwater.
Hmm.
Um, but that's no longer here. In fact, what's funny is that even the, even the group that I belonged to is basically a wash now. Like it's like as time goes on, everything just becomes more and
Yeah.
more intertang and
Well, people grow up, they
intermingled.
move out, they do their own thing, and they, go discover other places and meet people and fall in love and get married and what have you. And situations change. Jobs may send them all over the ding dong place, and they'll settle in one spot and then move on to another. So, I mean, everybody's situation changes, and that's the only thing really that's going to stay the same is everything's going to change.
It's just that
Now, Jamie has a question for you. He's talking about fighting in Sweetwater. How does that differ from 2025?
you
when
know
you're
it's
talking.
it's funny enough. It really isn't that at all.
Mhm.
The fighting actually happened with those people back then.
Mhm.
It's funny. Um, let's call it the Hispanic community, but it's actually the Cuban community.
Mhm.
There's none of that. There might be occasions that are so rare, but
Mhm.
there's none of that. I mean, there's always examples that you can draw, but like
Sure.
on average, and by the way, those are the stories that, I mean, I'm trying to contrast with what Jamie Page said. The famous stories that we hear in the past, like with the sheriff
Mhm.
pulling people from the bar and the fights throwing them in jail, like all those things, is only explaining the things that would have been fit to print because they're
Yeah.
exciting. It
Right.
doesn't talk about like the
Lucinda's making butter over there. We go order a pound, or whatever. Yeah.
exact. So we don't what the picture that we get, and it's fine because at least we get a. But if we don't think of the in between times, like, oh well, this was a population, and these are exemplary situations of like rough and tumble,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that Lucinda was fighting the neighbors and with a broom following them around. Like it's just snapshots of other things that was happening. I mean, that might have happened.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's because the neighbors won't keep their kids out of her strawberry patch. So Lucy was out there with a broom chasing him out the strawberry patch
Look,
again.
I am a fan of not only my personal history, but the local history and the history of the United States.
Hmm.
I'm interested in history because it's awesome. First of all, it's almost adventurous to
It
explore.
is.
But it also helps one make sense of what
Hmm.
the heck, how things fit. It gives you it gives you more perspective and these
Yeah.
stories about these people back. So, anyways, to answer Jamie Page, there's more people, and you could say, but in terms of rough and tumble, that's not a characteristic of the Miami thing. It really isn't. It's more metropolitan
Yeah.
in its thing. It's more of a metropolitan vibe.
I, I think we as a collective can all say we're better than that now, or at least we hope we're better than that now.
What than just bar
You
fights
know,
and this and that?
yeah, but I mean, you're always going to see that somebody's going to look at somebody wrong, or somebody's going to, hey, you stole my quarter off the pool table, that kind of thing. But if that's even a thing anymore, I don't know.
See,
That's how long
that's
it's been since I've been in a bar.
that's a
But
thing about the view of the United States broadly.
mm-hmm.
There, the to a degree,
Mm-hmm.
the old West sort of narrative
Mm-hmm.
really has continued, especially in the 20th century. But even still,
Mhm.
I can imagine that people would view us as quite wild broadly.
Cowboys kind of a thing.
Yeah, just like really wild,
Yep.
pistolas out and
Mhm.
this and that. And
Well,
I don't know about that necessarily. I know there's sprinklings of carry-ons from the past, but I don't know. I think that this is an ever transforming country.
well, it is. And you can see that in a lot of certain ways because you brought up that old west mentality. We live with that out here every day because remember all those wagon trains that left Missouri and came out west. This is one of the places they came to. I was reading an article today about we have two roads here. One's called South Stage Road, and the other one is called Old Stage Road. And they were part of the first toll road that the stagecoaches went over, coming from California up this way or coming from here down to California. And it was a toll road over the mountains that just happened to come into Jacksonville, which is about 15, 16 miles to the west of us. And that was, well, it still is the county seat of this county that we live in. That was the big city. Medford, which is now the big city, wasn't even a thing. This valley was settled in 1852. And that old toll road is still there. It's still a paved highway that we use a lot. And people were asking, well, why does it make this turn and why does it make that turn and why wasn't it a straight shot? And this article explained why and why there was a name change. Old Stage Road makes this big wide turn because the landowners at the time didn't want to give the toll road access to cut across their land. So the road had to go all the way around these farms and orchards and then hook back in. You would have thought they'd have made a straight shot. Well, they couldn't make a straight shot. Somebody owned that land and wouldn't give them access. And there's a magical mystery name change because it ended up in town. And when it went out of town, it went a different direction. So, okay, we have Old Stage and we have South Stage, but they were the same road. So, all right, fine. And they charged, if you wanted to come in on a stagecoach over that road, they charged the stage company 4.5 cents a mile. And that was divided up amongst the passengers. They paid that toll to use that road. And that went until the railroad came in which case there was a straight shot through from San Francisco to Portland. And there was a stop. That's when Medford really started blossoming because that was where the train station was. It totally bypassed Jacksonville and the population shifted. Now Jacksonville has maybe 2,000 people that lives there and Medford's over 90,000. So, it just wherever they put the train tracks is where the cities grew. And that you can see that all over the West Coast.
I asked about that. Funny enough, well, because I'm always
Mhm,
searching stuff. But I asked about how long. Like I asked if you started in Missouri, because I was thinking this was a few, maybe a week or so ago,
mhm.
and for some reason I ended up in that area, and I was thinking about your maybe it was due to that conversation we had in the last or few last shows. I don't remember exactly, but I was saying if you started off in Missouri back then, how long did it take these people to get to the West Coast? And it said that anywhere from 2 to 3 months it would have taken, sometimes more,
Yeah,
depending on the obstacles that they faced. And I was like,
and
oh, that.
depending upon when they left.
And I thought to myself, man, that's a journey. And then I asked it, and were any, because you had mentioned that too, but I asked it just to explore it out of my curiosity. I asked it, um, but I asked it this way. I said, yeah, but some people like. intentionally to see what it says. I said, yeah, but some people simply broke down along the way, or figured and settled right exactly somewhere in the midpoint, because that's as far as they were willing to go. And it said yes, many people would along the way would set up, and towns evolved from that, like just what you had mentioned.
Yeah.
And then after we went in, I was back and forth with it on just that concept. Then asked it. Notice all the crap that I like. Notice I'm everywhere. Like I'm always trying to figure. And so I asked, like it doesn't like there's no. It just I'll end up
No
in
rhyme or
somewhere.
reason. Yeah.
I just keep going in one direction to see what the heck's in there. Um, and so I asked it. Okay, well, what were those towns and cities? And then it I forget which ones now, but it listed like three of them.
Hmm.
And then I said um, something to the effect of, are those towns still around? It said yes. I said, what other towns? And then for some reason it got into a loop and it gave me the same ones. And I
Hmm.
said, no, what other towns? And then it repeated the same ones. I said, you're repeating the same ones. Give me some other towns.
Hmm.
And then it gives me this, like it got into a loop.
Hmm.
And then I said, and then I said to it, you know, did any go into Colorado? And then it said Colorado wasn't necessarily the main, right? Although you could,
Right.
although some northern reaches would have had some crossover, but it said no.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
uh,
didn't get into Colorado for many years. Yeah.
yeah,
It
so
was.
it gave me a trajectory
Mhm.
and an exploration of it, and because I wanted to see what that journey was like, considering oh, and I asked it, well, would the people of that time been aware of this, that, and the other? Like I really went into like
Mhm.
imagine, say, your ancestors from their point of view at that time as they made their journey.
Mhm.
I was asking it these things because I wanted to. It's almost like getting in the seat, the driver, and and so it gave me some insights of what perhaps might, it would have been the experience. And because remember, I'm down here in Florida. This is nothing to do.
Mhm.
It's part of the United States history, but it has like nothing to do with my localized anything. I just literally like, but it's part of the grander
Mhm.
um, U.S. story. And if you have a missing, we have many blind spots, but so
Sure.
it's like I have no idea of the West Coast
Yeah.
compared to Florida as I sit here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Other
It
than
just
what you saw when you lived in Southern Cal. Yeah.
yeah, which was great by the way. I could see why people. Um, uh, I could envision people going out west and getting there and saying, you know what, it was worth it.
Mhm.
It was worth it because it's
It's
so
some
beautiful.
beautiful country. Everything else, meh. But it's beautiful country.
I mean, I'm telling you that. Well, I can't praise it enough every time we talk about
Hmm.
this. I just simply
Yep.
can't praise it enough. It's just so right on point, except for the certain somethings you're talking about.
Well, now you get up here though, and it's cooler. Obviously, we have 3 months of summer, and then that's it. The rest is rain, and it's cold and it's cloudy. Now it's not um, Wisconsin, Michigan, South Dakota cold, but you do need a coat. You do need to run the heater. It does get cold, and the wind will rip right through you. So eh, we get good weather from about end of May, beginning of June till about the end of September, and that's it. You know, after that, it's cloudy and raining, but that's why it's so green. You know, um, but the Oregon Trail that they came through in the Great Migration of 1843, that basically went to the main military bases or military forts of the time. Um, the goal was to hit Fort Hall, Idaho, and that's where they would stock up provisions come down into Washington state and basically sell off their wagons, sell off their oxen and everything, and build barges and come down the Columbia River to get into the Willamette Valley in the Oregon Territory. So, or they would use their wagons to build barges and then come down the river. It would take, depending upon when they left, it would take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to get out here. Because the thing that most folks don't remember or don't know is that for the most part, everybody was walking. You weren't riding in the wagon. Now, older people and kids did ride in the wagon, young kids, but everybody else was walking. So you were walking around your wagon, leading your oxen. If you had a horse, everybody had extra jobs that were assigned. If you had a horse and somebody who could tend to your wagon to keep the train moving, you were probably put on a scouting party or a hunting party, and you rode out ahead looking for a place to camp for that day. Or you were a part of a hunting party to bring back meat and game for the entire train because there was no safe way along the road, you know. But that's another reason why some of those little towns set up was because they set up as trading posts for people following the trails to come out west. So, you know,
Then there was
um,
Indian encounters, friendly or
yes,
otherwise.
yes, friendly and otherwise. Exactly. There were a few areas that were kind of touchy, but for the most part, most of the Native American nations knew that these people were passing through and we don't bother them, they're not going to bother us. And that was normally the case. There were some issues that happened over the years because I only know about the first migration. I don't know about everyone, but they call it the first migration. That was the first trail that they went through to get a huge population into the Oregon Territory. And to Jim's point, if you had a horse, it was another animal to feed and tend. Not really. Yes, there is truth to that. It was an animal to feed and tend, but you took care of your own animals. Um, my knowledge of the initial migration comes from reading the book of a cousin of ours. It was called A Day on the Cow Column, when his name was Jesse Applegate, and he was one of the first migrants to come along on that first migration in 1843. They got together in Jefferson, Missouri to start heading out. And the original contract on this wagon train was you were bringing your family, your goods. If you had horses, that's fine, but no cattle. Well, Jesse was a cattle rancher. Jesse said, heck with that, I'm bringing my cattle. And he wasn't the only one. And there in Jefferson, Missouri, they basically split the wagon train into two parts. You had the main migration, people that didn't have cattle, and they were led by somebody else. I don't remember his name. For some reason, I'm thinking his name was Caldwell. His last name was Caldwell, but I could be wrong. Jesse basically was voted leader of the cow column, they called it. These were all these ranchers who had all these cattle. And a lot of people that had the few people that had a large number of horses stuck back with the cattle column as well because they needed horses to keep these cattle moving. And it would, the reason they didn't want a bunch of cattle is because they knew it would slow down the process. And it did because Jesse's cow column got to the Oregon Territory. Oh my God, it was about 2 months after the initial, the main wagon train got there. It was a long, slow process. And he wrote a book about the quote unquote average day out on the cow column, starting with wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and then bedding down at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And you always had people on guard, and you always had people out hunting. The horses were used again to scout, round up cattle, and go off on hunting parties. So they were valued. They were not a hindrance. So, but for the most part, your average uh, homesteader on the wagon train coming out to the Oregon Territory walked the whole way, and it moved just that fast. The whole train did. And that's why it took so long.
That was in the 1850s, 60s, 70s.
This was 1843, his experience. And so what happened after that, I don't know, because as more and more every year you have more wagons coming out and more families coming out. Not all of them made it. People did die along the way. And the roads got improved, and little trading posts started springing up where they would trade with the locals and you could get some supplies. And depending upon how far you went from um, St. Joseph, Missouri, you could get, well, just to the far western side of Missouri. Suddenly, little towns started popping up there. They could come back into the bigger cities and buy supplies and move some out there. So if you needed to get something, you could get something there. And then that just kind of extended further out and further out along the way. It's kind of like how gas stations and fast food follows the freeways.
Yeah, just like
You
what we
build,
have now.
yeah, you build a new interstate. Within 6 months, there's going to be a McDonald's somewhere along the way, probably three or four. You know,
That's what
so
happened with Sweetwater. We were the only place in town. We were town.
yeah,
And around it, I mean, there was the airport, the Tamiami Airport, which became later the university, but
hmm,
it was just a military thing or just an, like an outpost type thing. But based on the population here growing,
yeah,
it anchored the ability for other places around it to spread
hmm,
until it's become what it is. But actually, Sweetwater is like the place,
hmm,
like the original place out in the boondocks, let's say.
yeah,
That's pretty much what um what this is. So it's similar to that. That's just how people,
yeah,
you know, oh well, I'm gonna build outside, just outside of town because I don't want that mess. And then somebody comes along, oh, I'm gonna do the same thing. Hey, they need a supermarket, and boom, and then it just keeps
hmm,
going and going.
yep. Yep. And then you have the boom towns and what have you. They'd find gold or they'd find copper or they'd find whatever. And the town would boom. And heck, Virginia City, Nevada was the biggest city west of the Mississippi for many, many years. And it was simply because of all the miners that were there when they discovered that the Comstock lode, the huge silver deposit in the side of that mountain. And it was that way for many, many years. Now, it's kind of stuck in this weird 1800s and today kind of melding, you know. Um, Most of the buildings in Virginia City were the original ones that were built in the 1800s. Um, there are a few new buildings and there are quite a few that have been restored. But when you get up on the boardwalk and you're walking down the street, down C Street, which is the main drag in Virginia City, and you go into the Bucket of Blood Saloon, for example, it is the Bucket of Blood Saloon from the 1800s. There is it's an upstairs office in one building called the Territorial Enterprise. That was the newspaper office. and you can't go in because the doors are locked, but there's glass windows and glass in the doors. Mark Twain's desk is right there. You look in the door and off to the right. That's Mark Twain's desk when he wrote for the Territorial Enterprise. And it's all set up with stuff he would have used at the time. But that's where it happened, you know. It
Man,
it's so but that was huge until the railroad came through. Then when the railroad came through, they put a stop, and these stops were decided based on how far you could get before your train needed water and more firewood. Out here in the West, we didn't have a lot of coal, so they burned wood. And Reno ended up being a big depot where they could get water out of the Truckee River, and there's a big old forest there in the mountains. It's right at the base of the Sierra range. So they made a railroad stop, and now there's 400,000 people living there. You know, the
Johnny
town just
Cash. Johnny Cash shot a man in Reno just to watch him die.
mm-hmm, yeah, yeah. So that's basically how a lot of these towns out here in the West sprouted up. The railroad came, and the people followed. And then when the interstate high or when highways and freeways started getting built, they flocked to that too. You know, then the interstates, and you can see here stretches in the California Central Valley where one highway was the main north south route going from Southern California to Northern California. Then the interstate highway was built 20 miles to the west. And this town out here on this old highway kind of died, and a new town sprung up around that interstate. So the town is still there, but the population is cut in half. And there's more people that have moved out by the interstate because that's where the money is, you know. So it's strange. You can follow some of the old state highways here, and it's a completely different experience from the interstate freeway.
The West is the best, as said by Jim Morrison. And it's a funny thing because I see how that argument can be made very easily from my experience. But then again, I was in my 20s and like having all sorts of fun.
Well,
But still, it was great just the same. I mean, the West is just amazing temperature wise. Or at least the area where I mean, just in the scenic sort of thing. Just you can't.
well,
There's no way to beat it. I don't see. I mean,
there's
there might be, but
there's it's a huge geographic area. It is. But still, I think 75% of the US population lives east of the Mississippi. Because
yeah,
the one thing they don't say about the West is it's mostly desert,
yeah,
you know. The overwhelming majority of the population lives within about 100 miles of the ocean out here.
yeah.
You get further inland and it's desert until you hit the Rocky Mountains. Then you come down the other side of the Rocky Mountains, it's all open plain. And the populations in, Colorado, yeah, you got big cities like Denver, Colorado Springs, but the populations of most of the state is pretty low. I mean, and you get out here in some of these desert communities, you have communities, they are legitimate towns that have like 6 people that live there, but they have a post office, so it is a legitimate town. I mean, we lived on Highway 50, which the American Automobile Association said is the loneliest highway in America. And it is true. There are stretches of that highway where you can drive for 2 hours and never see another car. You'd be the only vehicle on the road. And it's just open desert and nobody lives there.
When this state was a territory and the consideration was in the process, there were legislators in
Mhm.
Washington D.C.
Mhm.
There was this one guy that said that, I'm paraphrasing terribly, but this is the sentiment of what he said. He says that is probably the worst decision that we could make because nobody wants to live there except the gators, toads, and snakes. That
Yeah.
place is infested with mosquitoes and this and that. And you know what? At the time, he was right.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, but somehow it turned into what it turned into. And it is a pretty spectacular state in terms of not only its history, but like its economic power
Mhm.
and all sorts of stuff. Um, it's an incredible thing because really what this is mostly a subtropical slash
Yeah.
jungle slash swamp slash with pockets of dry land,
Mhm.
and yet pineland forest,
Mhm.
rockland,
Yeah.
but really this is like like where I'm sitting now. a
Mhm.
hundred years ago was literally the Everglades, not even the
Mhm.
outskirts. We were well in the Everglades.
Well, it's funny that you say that because you said Sweetwater, and I'm thinking, where did they get their name from? Wonder where they got that name from. Then I thought, oh, somebody dropped a bag of sugar in the canal. So,
Well, this
but that has to be one of the few places where they could get fresh water because everything else is kind of brackish,
not here.
salty. Really, not there. Okay.
Well, what happens with this place, which is strange,
Hmm.
the Everglades starts off in this huge lake in the center of the state, which is
Yeah.
called Lake
Okeechobee.
Oka. Yeah,
Okeechobee. Yeah.
and so what happens is that there's a slight slant to the state
Hmm.
from north to south,
Right.
and then the lake gets rain over spills and
Hmm.
underwater,
Hmm.
or I'm sorry, they call it aquifers,
Hmm.
underground waterways,
Yeah.
and that sort of moves slowly south,
Hmm.
and it keeps a water table all around us at either knee deep,
Hmm.
waist deep, and sometimes more, but generally about knee deep to waist deep, all everywhere. But then now, when you go down further south,
Hmm.
and that's where you get what you're talking about, where
Mm.
so a huge portion is a brackish situation.
Okay. Yeah.
But where we're at, it's literally, I guess you'd say, sweet water.
Hmm.
Um, would be the case. But if you dig right now, like let's say if
Hmm.
I dig um, 6 feet,
Hmm.
you're in full fledged freaking water.
Wow. See, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that. Our water table here, it varies, of course. I've seen wells dug here that go anywhere from 90 feet to the deepest one I personally have heard of 'em was a little over 300 feet before they hit water.
Yeah, that's quite a. I mean,
Yeah.
but just to be clear,
Hmm.
we have the top layer, which is where we stand on,
Hmm.
obviously. And then when we poke down
Hmm.
about 6 feet, it could be a little bit more, a little bit less, depends, but around, we break into a certain aquifer that's not
Hmm.
drinkable water. It's more. It's got this egg sulfur smell to it.
Yeah.
It's savage.
Yeah.
You can use that for watering your plants and this and that, but it's not good for drinking. You have to
Yeah.
poke down a little bit further down,
Hmm.
and then you hit the good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That Nevada is like that all over the place, but heavy mineral content in the water. It's okay for agriculture and like watering golf courses and things like that, but you can't drink it.
Yeah,
It's just the mineral content is just too bad, and you're right, it stinks to high heaven.
it does.
So yeah, Linda says, remember when we lived in Stagecoach, the water table was 500 feet plus deep. You had to go down that far to dig a well to hit water.
That's pretty extreme.
Um, Back to our conversation about the railroads and everything. Greg says train stations were 6 miles apart here in Canada because the station and track manager would inspect the track 3 miles each way from the station each day with a hand cart.
Oh
So go
wow,
3 miles one direction, come back, go 3 miles the other direction, come back. So the stations were 6 miles apart. Yeah, okay, gotcha. Um, all the stations turned into towns, and the ones that are left are still 6 miles apart. Yeah, yeah.
that's pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, we couldn't even probably. It would be shocking if we could walk around 100 to 120 or something years ago just to see the areas that we're in
Right.
now. It would be probably like, wow.
Out here, you still kind of can. Like, you can go out and you can find stretches of the Oregon Trail was not the only trail out here. You can go out and you can find stretches of these trails from these migrations out west, and you can walk in the wagon ruts, and you can find the old forts that they used to go to. When we lived down in Nevada in stagecoach, as a matter of fact, one of the stage stops was a place called Fort Churchill, and we didn't live too far away from it. So we would go out there, and it was an old military fort, and you could see the ruins of these old adobe buildings and everything. But at one time, this was an active army base, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Linda has a thing where um, here it's easier because she's with the band, but down there she would pick two or three small cemeteries that nobody even acknowledged for Memorial Day, and she would go out and pipe at these cemeteries to kind of pay respects to the veterans that were buried there. And Fort Churchill Cemetery happened to be one of them. And it's strange to think about. In many ways, this is ancient history, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't all that long ago. Because, like, when I think about it, my grandfather, let's see, he would be my great great grandfather, came out here from Missouri on a wagon when he was a baby. My three times great grandfather, his dad, was, born in Indiana, migrated to Missouri, then migrated out here. I never met either of them, obviously, but my grandmother knew my great great grandfather. She didn't like him, but she knew him. I guess he was from the old school. Said he swore like a sailor, but he was from that old school that if you didn't work for it, you don't deserve it. You didn't earn it, you know. And that's just the way he lived his life.
I
But
asked AI
mhm.
about some. This is connected to what you're saying now. Um, Everything's connected, but whatever. It's connected to what you're saying now, or it reminded me. I asked AI the following. It's a rough, thing of what I asked it. What? How am I going to say it? How how is it, or would it be fair to say, or is it possible that along family lines? So I said, I have noticed facial expressions in my father and grandfather that I reproduce. Certain ticks and certain things that I repeat in the way that like for instance when we're talking or and me just anywhere, but like you might have noticed that sometimes I'm talking and I'm like touching my nose
Yeah,
and like picking it a little bit and stuff. I mean, I'm not going down, I'm not digging. Hold on, Mark, hold on. I'm not, but like you'll see me start to
yell
sort of
when you
like,
get to the bridge.
do I have to pay a toll? Is there a toll for this one? But you'll see me do a little bit. Hold your horses, everybody. I'm working on some. I'm mining for gold here.
Yep.
No, but um, but you'll see me like mess with it and stuff
Yeah.
occasionally. I've caught myself doing that.
Yeah.
It's something that my dad would occasion would do. It's a subtlety. It's one out of many things that just came up. I should have picked something else less. Go
Well,
ahead. Go ahead.
but there's another thing that you do, and I wonder if your dad did it.
Yeah.
You do it quite often,
Yeah.
and that is with the hands, with the fingers. You're very expressive with like the first three fingers of whatever hand is up. Did your dad do that a lot when he was making a point?
Yeah. That. So he did that,
Mm-hmm.
but just as ref as context for the Cuban population, they're very expressive with their hands in a
Mm-hmm.
very similar way to the Italian population.
Mm-hmm.
Very expressive in that fashion. Why exactly that is, I don't know. Although my grandmother would do that a lot. There's the daughter; she had direct Italian, like just around
Mm-hmm.
the block Italian, and that would have been passed on. And maybe my dad got it through there, but just broadly with the Cuban
Mm-hmm.
population, they used their hands similar to how the Italians would.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those quirks of populations. Well,
I'm
what do you?
sorry, you said Italians and being expressive and everything. I told you before, it made me float on something. Told you before that Linda and I, we send each other videos of dogs being idiots and things like that. And one of them was a husky. Husky are some of the most vocal breeds of dogs,
Yeah,
and they're overly dramatic. You touch a husky and he doesn't want to be touched, and they'll sound like you're
yeah.
killing him or something like that. Well, it was this lady kind of arguing with her husky in Italian. And you know how they get that lilt in their voice and and the husky was doing it's just like, my God, the dogs have got an Italian accent. I'll try to find the video and send it to you because it's actually funnier than hell.
So I pressed AI on that, like passing along and stuff.
Hmm.
And there's also something in the eyes too. Like I've caught myself whenever I do look in the mirror, which is not, but I do combing my hair or something, or in the rear view mirror and stuff. There's a
I'm,
certain look that I would point to that I could describe, but I guess I'll leave it to this. It's almost like a sadness or
mhm,
introspection, uh, or awareness mixed together. There's a look to it, and not to mention just the feature of the eye,
yeah.
and the shape of their. But there's a certain something,
Hmm.
and I have caught myself and saying this is the look of my father, my grandfather. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously we're there,
Yeah.
like they're my actual direct. I get that,
Hmm.
but there's an expressiveness aside from just the shape of the eye and this and that.
Hmm.
Um, which in fact I've seen it in. Funny enough, I recognized it in. I saw a video of an older Dali, Salvador Dali, who
Hmm.
was from Cadiz. He was born in this, and there was a video where he's pushed out in a wheelchair during his later time, and
Yeah.
he was covered with blankets, and they show a close up of his face, and Dali's face has a look that reminded me directly of my grandfather. Not to mention that we're Spanish, literally, and so you would
Yeah.
imagine, but there was a certain something that just sort of like set me back and like, well, wait, damn. And so I asked AI. Anyways, that's just that. But I asked AI if that's true for my grandfather and my father and myself, and I have a picture of my great grandfather, and I could imagine how that would probably have also reflected in him certain little things. But I asked AI, but why not 200, 300, 400, 500 years? I asked AI, what would that be like? Is that something realistic for me to assume? Like, I asked it all this question, and then it came back with saying, it is quite possible that traits are not only passed along in short spans, but
Mhm.
across very long spans of history,
Mhm.
down families, certain things that you might
Yeah.
not know the origin of. And from there,
Mhm.
because I asked it that, so it's quite possible that so this notion that you were saying, well, look, my great great grandfather and this, so it's quite possible that some of the things that you don't know, that you don't know that you do,
Yeah.
that are just totally just, it's just you,
Yeah.
are actual handed down things, quirks, gestures, things
Well,
that they were doing, and you
yeah.
would be none the and you would be none the wiser
Right.
that you're doing them. They were just
Mhm.
passed on. And so my question was surrounding that, and how far back could that possibly trace? We know that you carry your paternal line directly through DNA. You
Mhm.
know that. So why not these
Well,
certain little quirks and such as an aside? Now, you do get contributions. Last thing I'll say about this, you do, just to hear what you say, you do get contributions from all your family members as it
mhm.
starts to, and so traits from your maternal side would influence too, and this and that. But my recognition was in this focus of like through my father, grandfather, and so on. And it said that, yeah, it's likely possible, and that these stretches could go on very distantly. It's just that we
Mhm.
don't know the origin. And then I got into questions about things we use like ladders, this, that, and the other. Them as like recently done, like totally modern, but they've been around so since like before written
Yeah.
like language and stuff. And like, so, anyways,
Well,
what are your thoughts?
there's another thing to look at in that, and sociologists will tell you, yes, certain people will fight it, they'll argue with it, but it is the case. Young boys look at their fathers very carefully, and they remember certain mannerisms and some traits, and a lot of times they will echo those mannerisms or those traits, be it the way they walk, the way they hold themselves, the way they do certain things. Um, it may be something like rubbing the corner of an eye, just something that you don't think about,
Yeah.
and you find yourself doing that as well.
Hmm.
Little girls tend to look at their mothers as the role model in that regard as well. Obviously, we both look at both. I mean, I've been told that there are certain things, when you do that, you look like your mom. Your mom used to do that. What? That kind of thing. God knows how far it went back it goes because God knows where they started doing that. So you do have certain little things that are passed down generationally, and you don't know where the heck it started. You were talking about when you look in the mirror and you notice things. Um, certain things look like your father. Certain things look like your grandfather. Anymore, I try to avoid the mirror as much as I can because, in fact, I said it to Linda earlier. I was in doing something. I don't remember if I was combing my hair or what. I looked in the mirror and Jesus, where did you dig up this fat old man? And she's like, I got you out of the cabbage patch. And I'm like, well, did you keep the receipt? Like, Jesus, when did I turn into my own grandfather? Because that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing my grandfather. And it's like, this is not a good thing. But you're powerless. And I
Yeah.
have noticed that I do little things, certain things the way he did it. because
Yeah.
that's who I was around growing up. So whether there is a biological DNA type of a association, or it's just based on that's what I saw growing up and that's what I mimicked because I thought that's what you do. I don't know which is which or what is what, but we are just the culmination of all of our experiences. And I mean, I can see my father in me, I can see my mother in me. It's kind of strange. But my brother is more or less the same. More he resembled my mother a lot more than I do. I resemble my dad more than he does. So certain things he does, it doesn't remind me of dad, even though dad did those things. Because he resembles my mother more than he resembles my dad. I just it's a disassociation there. So anyway, I don't even know why that where that came from. But I think that it's yeah, Jim says there is such a thing as genetic memory. Yeah, I do know that. I do agree with that. I'm just wondering how much of this is that genetic memory and how much is of that is just us mimicking what we grew up with and we saw all of our lives. That when you take off a hat, you immediately wipe your brow, whether you're sweating or not. But you always saw grandpa do that and you always saw dad do that, so you do that.
Well, they have there are suggestions,
Mhm.
and studies. We could discover them and stuff, but I'm just going to recount what I've read through, um, knowing that there's a measure of error in my wording or my but just broadly, where things like the conditions that your ancestors faced,
Mhm.
the pressures and eating habits or availability of
Yeah.
food, um, just all those things. There's suggestions that those things get carried on to the next. They can inform the next generations, not only
Mhm.
um, psychologically based on what you're saying with
Mhm.
sociology, but um, in some other like processes of the body. So
Mhm.
there's a suggestion of genetic contributions too, like what Jim was saying. And if it's true that we get passed along our physicalness, our hair, although we're not exact copies, obviously.
Right.
Like for instance, no one ever doubted that I was my father's son by leaps and bounds. Like people constantly mention that you look
Yeah.
just like your father. I mean, like constantly.
Yeah.
I believe that I actually look probably more like my grandfather, but I'm actually a combination. My
Mhm.
so the thing is that if we get passed along those things,
Mhm.
you know, um, why not these other things that are there? And I think
Yeah.
it's what's true is, or more likely true, is a combination of all those things that you mentioned.
I think you're right because Jim went further to say it happens even if you never met your family. There are instances where they have found kids who were ended up being wards of the court, went to orphanages or something like that, and they, grew up separate. They
Yeah,
were adopted by separate families and grew up with no contact with one another. But then when they met and they got together, you can see that like they'll both stand in a certain way. They'll both do things so similarly. It's almost uncanny. And this is especially true of twins that are separated at birth. They will do a lot of the same things, never having been exposed to their siblings. So there is a lot to that genetic memory. Some of it could be mimicking those we grew up with, but some of it very well be genetic, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, there's a certain posture, or there's a certain way they turn, or a certain gait. They walk a certain way. It's like, wow, you look just like this person over here. And sometimes that can be pretty scary. So,
Well, and if you think of the situations people fall into, and then the next generation that comes along, like for myself,
mhm,
in theory and in practice, probably based on this is a very personal but good example. Just on the basis of me being born here,
mhm,
my parents being born in Cuba,
mhm,
but their traumatic experience as
mhm,
kids. If you think about what that means, if you put yourself in their shoes, imagine if
mhm,
you were born in a little town in Cuba
mhm, and then
and
immigrated.
your family had certain stability. They owned a business, your parents did, you went to school, your cousins and uncles owned sugar plantations. On both
Mhm,
sides of the family, you had people that owned cattle, their own ranches. They were like, let's call it the elite of their society at the time.
mhm,
And although, you know, you were a part of that through the family, you had your little business, your parents had your little business, and you were growing up with your friends.
mhm,
And then at the age of 19 to 20, here comes this transition of people killing your family members and your neighbors, um, on the basis of, you know, correcting wrongs. And then you see the confiscation of your family's well-being, businesses apart from that, and you start to see a domino effect of your whole world.
yeah.
Imagine the trauma that would have caused my father to leave at 20 years of age, come here to join the army with the explicit, direct, conscious objective of joining the US Army in order to be sent and dropped back into his home country in order to
Mhm,
shoot it out
and take
with
it
the
back.
people that took your stuff and
Mhm,
your family and your life, your whole life. And then on the opposite side, imagine, um, uh, you know, my mom, the female out there, Linda. Imagine a little girl of 14 years old watching as all these people coming in, taking over,
mhm,
and then taking your family's business, and the fear of little girls with the instability that would bring,
mhm,
your parents arguing over what they're going to do, listening to that at home, your neighbors afraid, you can no
yeah,
longer butcher your animals because now that's against the law. Slowly liberties are being
yeah.
curtailed. And then you're even threatened with, to you, a threat as a little girl,
Mhm,
that we're gonna have to, mom and dad tells them, we're gonna have to send you and your sister away with the nuns to Canada because we need to have you safe. And the fear that would impose on them,
mhm,
and then eventually to retract that, but the fear remains. And then you finally make it out, and now these two individuals, my dad and my mom, as young youths, end up in Miami,
mhm,
in a world that doesn't even speak the language that they grew up in. It welcomed them, but out of sorts. They're kids. And then the realization sets in that everything that they knew was lost little
mhm,
by little across time. And so in that process, they figure, they met here and married here to produce me. So in conclusion, that experience, would it not affect me knowing my parents' history, even though I participated not physically, consciously, from my own camera
mhm,
recorder of
mhm,
my brain?
yeah,
None of that. My experience was frickin', I don't know, Aerosmith, my friends
yeah,
barefoot running through the puddles, and American life with that extra context of adults around me
I would
retelling how much
uh,
they lost just shortly a
that's
decade ago.
where I was gonna go because you grow up hearing the stories. You grew up hearing about your grandfather and your father and what their families went through, what they lost, what was taken away from them, how they got there in the first place. You grew up hearing all of those stories, just as I grew up hearing all the stories of the Applegate brothers coming out in 1843. So um, you do pick up a lot of that secondhand, but that's part of, and that's what I mean when I say the we are the sum total of our experiences. That's part of those experiences. So, yeah, some of that is going to affect how you look at the world, how you look at life, how you look at people, how you determine trust or mistrust or distrust. It's going to affect a lot of stuff. Sure, it's going to.
So, so exactly, I agree that I am a product of this history,
Hmm.
even though I had the luxury or the privilege to not see loved
Yeah.
ones taken away and
And
disappeared, things like that. But the narrative in Miami, Florida, the last century, the narrative of the community that was around,
hmm
while running parallel to me playing and reading comic books and
hmm
active with my friends, many of them shared similar stories
yeah.
that we did not discuss as friends. We went about the business of
hmm
exploring music, books, movies, the culture as it was, and many times not even knowing each other's particular histories when
hmm
in fact we were all part of the same
Basically the
history.
same. Yeah.
How, I mean, for the most part, there were kids that were from other
Sure.
parts, but the point is not that. The point is that all these things produced in me, apart from my decision making and my reasoning things out, like it produced who I am now.
hmm
And you know, you can't,
But
so my of authority or government, you know.
beyond that, you were not the only one. You were not the only product of that situation. Excuse me. So that spread throughout the culture because so many people of your parents' age group, of their generation, had the same story. They had the
Right,
same shared experience.
right,
So
right,
that became a part of the local culture at the time.
right.
And now you've come along, your experience is part of the local culture. What's coming up behind you is the new wave of people who have moved in, along with the people of your age group that have had their kids and they're moving into these positions.
And it's a distancing.
It is. It is because you're currently two generations away from the immigration. You yourself are one generation away. You're the first generation away from that immigration. But if you look at people who came over about the same time they did, your parents actually waited and had you much later than than I would say the overwhelming majority of the people who came over at the same time. So now the younger generations coming up, the millennials and then the Gen Z, they're so far away from the immigration. I would say a good percentage of them don't even know about the immigration, don't even know why their parents came.
Yeah, that's an incredible thing.
Hmm. Because the stories weren't told, the stories weren't saved, the history wasn't important enough to be retold, and that's sad. That's really sad.
But using that as well as an example, this is the American process. But you can even take it out of the American process. You can say, like, let's go exaggerating.
Well,
Well, it is the American process because you don't. So, for instance, Other than you being interested in your family history, the average I've read things where the average American doesn't even know the name of their grandparents or
Yeah.
great grandparents. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
don't know the last names of their they just simply
That's
don't.
and I think that's a measure of youth, or not measure, excuse me. I think that's I think that has to do with youth because the history was not really all that important to me until I got into my late 40s. Then it started being important to me. And then I got interested in it. And then I started looking into it. But when I was in my 20s and 30s, I really didn't give a damn. I heard the stories and yeah, okay, great, that's cool. But I wasn't interested in looking into it on my own. It was in my 40s. Now I'm seeing that with like my grandson. Yeah, it's cool, it's great, grandpa, but he doesn't have the interest that I have. And a lot of that can lead to stories just not being told, family histories being lost. You also have deaths in the family, which contribute to that. You have divorces, which contribute to that. If the kid never sees his father, how's he going to know his father's history if he doesn't even know his father? So, there's a lot of that. There's a different social dynamic today than there was when you and I were growing up. When, if there wasn't anything on TV, we were sitting at the kitchen table playing a board game and talking and discussing these things. I got a good percentage of family history listening to my dad and my grandpa talk about it while we were all playing cards,
Yeah,
you
you
know?
remember the stories told,
Hmm.
and then you at some point when the interest sparks, like you're explaining,
Hmm.
those are very helpful
It's a good
as
starting place. It's a starting point to look into, you know?
I was going to use an exaggerated example. And the example is imagine, I mean, talking about how things get passed on or not, or this or that.
Hmm.
Imagine tribal activity in prehistoric Europe,
Hmm.
meaning before they started documenting stuff that we have access to today. I'm not talking about like
Hmm.
like ooga ooga, or I'm talking about like just this side this this side shy of people putting pen to paper and
Hmm.
documenting things either for religious reason, whatever.
Yeah.
Imagine the conditions that, like, let's say a family, they have their children, and in the world that they existed then, they were concerned about other tribes, or clans, attacking, taking
Coming
their
in and taking
women
their children. Yeah.
or their children or their goods or all of the above. And imagine the blunt instruments or sharp instruments used to defend, and how killing was part of the go-to solution.
Yeah.
And imagine the kids learning that. Imagine the societal at that time in those clans,
Yeah.
tribes, or what, um, understanding of doing away with your enemies in such a brutal way, immediate,
Yeah.
and what that would do to the generations. How okay was it to slay your enemy and such stuff like that? Well, across time, we're obviously not there now,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
we come from people that took swords and ran others through in order to
Yep.
preserve or even take
Uh-huh.
like, we don't know the details of that, but like, we have progressed in a very, I would call it a very refined and cultured way, because I mean, we're not, hey Eloy, what are you doing later? Oh, I'm gonna have to go and attack this farm because we need milk. We're
Yeah.
not we're
Yeah.
not I could sure use a couple of them goats that
No,
they have over there.
but there is history here in the Americas of that all the way up to the turn of the 20th century.
Well, that's true.
So, we think it's completely wild now, would never even consider it. It was going on 100 years ago,
The majority of the
you know.
people, though, like,
But yeah.
we've gone from something probably that was pretty
Mhm.
extreme if we were to see it now.
Yeah. Well, we'd like to think we're more civilized, but we still carry a lot of those traits.
Oh no, no, we carry the traits, but I'm saying that
Mhm.
as a society,
Yeah.
we've refined. It
Yeah.
doesn't take away the human nature element of it,
No, it doesn't.
but I'm
It
saying that
doesn't.
based on the even flow of how society has refined
Mhm.
the limits or lines in the sand and this and that, I mean that's worth at least recognizing. We're not
Yeah.
complete, you know, off our
Savages,
rockers.
no.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a few out there, but, what are you gonna
Well,
do?
there's a fair
But
amount actually.
when you were talking about the history being lost and things like that, and I kinda got that look on my face, it was only because there are so many people who are dedicated to preserving that history and retelling those stories that while family histories may be getting muddy and muddy and murky. Wow.
Yeah. Merc-
Um, other certain there are certain things that are being saved and conserved and protected. And um, that's why just about every town has a historic section, Old Town, where you can go and see the old architecture, see what it looked like back in the day. Of course, it's still full of SUVs and kids screaming and hollering, but it kind of harkens back to those days. Just about every area, I won't say town, but at least the county has a historical society where they have preserved those photographs, that footage and that film, and they have saved those stories. You only have to look to your local libraries. A lot of times they will have speakers who will come in with and give presentations on life in Sweetwater in the 1800s or whatever. I mean, it happens here a lot, but and then you have museums and you have just festivals. Linda is getting ready to do a festival in Ashland, Oregon, about I want to say 16 miles down the interstate from us, where the same weekend she's going to be bagpiping and she'll have her spinning wheel out, spinning wool into yarn for knitting, kind of demonstrating and keeping that whole thing alive during the same weekend. And she's not the only one. There are going to be all kinds of people out there showing all kinds of things of that nature. So there are enough people interested in keeping the history alive and making sure we don't lose certain aspects of it. The overall cultural thing, I don't think the cultural history is going to go away, but family histories is another thing entirely.
I think
Um,
that's so well. I would think that because obviously I'm interested in it, but I think that what you explained with Linda and the other people that's just very vital and needed and important because without going through the process of just showing other people interacting and passing it along, even if it's in the sense of like in a festival and people are walking by and they see some people will gravitate more, others maybe not
mhm.
so much because they're interested in a ride, and but all the dynamics involved. But the idea of claiming a stake and saying, hey, this
Yeah.
this is part of your history, this is part
Mhm.
of our collective history, just doing that, I
Mhm.
think it's one of the most important. I would say that because I'm obviously super focused and interested on that, but I think that without us knowing the past and speaking it and
Mhm.
exchanging it like we do a lot, I think without that, I mean we don't
We all
we,
lose.
we all lose in very significant ways,
Mhm.
you know. And so yeah, I'm a proponent for that.
Mhm. Well, um, I got an idea in my head several years back. I've been doing it myself little by little, but my father and I were hip deep in genealogy. we dove in head first. So when I say hip deep, our feet were sticking out. That was all you could see. I asked him, I said, look, do me a favor. Just write your story. Just write your story. What do you mean? I said, well, born here, lived here, lived here, lived here, went to this school, went off into the Navy and did this. I was stationed here, did that. What you did, because somebody down the line is going to be looking for you. And you're in a position right now to where you can tell your story so there's no ambiguity because it's coming straight from you. And so he said, you know what? That's a great idea. And I've been doing it as well. He did it. He printed it up and he sent both of my daughters a copy, sent me a copy. And I made sure that that got attached to him on the um, FamilySearch.org website. So everything he wrote verbatim, misspellings and all, are right there attached to him. That's his story. I've been doing the same thing for me. I would encourage everybody to think seriously about doing that. It doesn't have to be a 50-page epic. You don't have to get into your innermost thoughts or what have you. But somewhere down the road, somebody is going to be looking for you, or they're going to run across you, and they're going to want to know who you were. It's one of the reasons why we're still doing this. It's because sometime down the road, one of my descendants, uh, or one of my brother's descendants, is going to be looking for their family, and they're going to come across this goofball named, and here I am. I got nothing to hide. You see me, you see how I speak, you see the goofy glasses I wear. This is it, raw. And hopefully, some of the family stories won't go away, especially with all the stories we've uh, shared over the years we've been doing this. So,
Yeah. I mean,
seriously think about writing your story.
we have left a record of weekly exchange with a sense of it, of wanting to entertain, but we've
Hmm.
also gone in so many different topics and repeated many as well. But
Hmm.
if they were to be viewed at some point in the future, and not if, it's likely, we
Hmm.
don't know what the future is, but it would be a template
Hmm.
sufficient to
Yeah,
gather a very rounded, very detailed, actually, um, notion
yeah.
of where you were at and what you were thinking and what
And who
your
we are,
what's that?
and who we are
Yeah,
right now.
I mean it's pretty detailed, to be
Hmm.
honest with you. I mean, we've done many years. I mean, we're like,
Well, I think about it. I would love to be digging around on the internet and find something like this from my great great grandfather who I never met.
oh, it would be mind blowing.
Yeah, it would be just an absolute wait a minute, holy cow. Jefferson, is that you? You know, just to see how the, the the thought processes, to hear the stories from them, to see how they talked, how they moved, what was important to them, what wasn't important to them. you know so I don't know, maybe sometime down the road somebody will come across this and go, Mark, is that you? It's me, warts and all.
I mean, just think of this: me from my station here in Sweetwater, Florida, have consumed things like Mormon church history and the lives of
Yeah.
certain families. For what reason? I have no freaking connection, and
Yeah.
yet I've processed, and so I have certain ideas
Mm-hmm.
that I've learned about, certain things that I've learned about.
Mm-hmm.
So I have certain ideas over certain Mormon families and the situations they were involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Why did I bring that up? Because it's one of countless different things that I stumbled on just because I did. And those
Mm-hmm.
people wrote those stories down then.
Mhm. Yeah,
and they still exist. And
yeah,
some other person
but
might not be interested, and then the next one,
mhm.
yes. But the point is that they recorded their history.
Yeah, and think about all the stories, all the histories like that that we're never gonna know about because nobody bothered to write it down. We may think something is pretty mundane, but it's important to somebody else, you know?
Yeah, I don't, I've never, that mundane concept, of like, the only, so I never, like, I know that that exists, like, I understand that, but my more concern, just in contrast to that, my concern is cringiness.
Yeah.
Mundane, I don't have a problem with. Like, let's say, there's video of you sitting by the computer, and you're just working on, like,
Mhm.
bills and stuff. Like, this is just a function thing, and this and that.
Yeah.
But, like, so, like, I'll say it like this: I don't want to. It's an. I would want to steer away from ignorance. I would want to steer away from, so, like, 200 years from now, 100 years from now.
Mhm.
It's impossible to get away from. But hear me out with what I'm saying. Ima- Imagine this is. But let me just say, if they had video recording and YouTube in, like, the
Mhm.
1870s, or 1860s, and it was Reconstruction,
Mhm.
or 1870s, and such, and it was
Yeah.
Reconstruction, and, like, people like the Klan got together and they were filming their things, and this is for the better of this, as an example.
Yeah.
And then now that's conserved, and, like, people today, now they review and they're like, holy crap, what the hell are they
Well,
saying, like, that
that
cringiness.
one of the first movies with a plot. Um, is the first movies were like The Train Station in Paris or A Day at the Beach in Atlantic City, New Jersey. But the first feature film with a plot was called Birth of a Nation,
Yeah,
and it deals with exactly that. The Klan plays a major part in it,
yeah, yeah.
a
I've
major
seen
role,
parts of it.
and it has been conserved not because of the story, but because of its place in history as the first feature film, American feature film with an actual and a storyline to follow. So
Yeah.
that has happened. It's there for all to see.
But
It's
imagine in Vivid, because that
mhm,
was a movie. I get it, but
yeah.
imagine the expressiveness that we have
Mhm.
as a moment. But so, like, actually, I'll even say a lighter version of
Mhm.
that, but still as cringy, in a different way, in a very different way, but still cringy. Is, imagine. So, like, you and I. Fortunately, I would say, I think that I'd feel safe that you would say too. We skipped, or were not participants in, the duck face, selfie
Yes.
era.
Mhm.
Because imagine, this is just on the lighter note of it, but talking about cringiness. Imagine we
Excuse
had
me.
future, like, hundreds of photos of Mark Lindsay next to the shop, and going,
Mhm. Oh,
and,
one for the Insta, you know.
so, but imagine a person 200 years from now,
Mhm.
and they say, "Oh, let's see how grandma, a day at the beach," and
Mhm.
instead of some, how we can look back and see people with
Yeah.
umbrellas and some nice stuff, and you're like, wow,
Mhm.
that's elegant, and this and that. In their case, they see, like, the Bears T-shirt and then duck face, and
Mhm.
and and, and
Grandma had a tramp stamp. Oh my god, you know.
see, those are the things that I think, man, damn, because it doesn't. Well, it might in the future, but for us today, at least you
Well,
tell me. I think it's, well, no, no. Let me say, if you look at a photo from 1800s, or 19,
mhm.
or what do you call it, the 20th century,
Mhm.
don't isn't there a dignified, classy, or wow, intriguing, but duckface does not.
No, yeah, I'm with you, But then again, who's to say in 20 years somebody may come up and be cringing about us talking about cringiness?
You're right.
So,
We can't
we
control that.
we have no way of knowing what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So,
We can't
I
control
just
that. You're right.
no, we can't control it. Because, it's 2045 and there's a guy sitting here watching this going, "What are you worried about? Get on with it." you know.
Well, I mean, you're right. It could be that in 2045,
Mhm.
duckface is viewed like
Mhm.
we view 1895 photos in
Yeah,
the Old
that
West.
could you imagine going to the local museum and it's the duck face
Exhibit.
exposition? Yeah, and
Oh,
there's just a million prints of duck face.
I'll tell you one other. I'll tell you one other that's kind of weird.
Uh,
In the 80s, no, that's not even 100% true, but okay, but we'll go with it. There was a point after the 70s
mhm.
where 70s fashion simply
Oh god.
looked insanely embarrassing. Okay, bear with me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The dumbest thing about the 60s and 70s was the way we dressed.
Well, I was a little kid, I was a baby,
Mhm.
so I was dressed up as the era. But for
Mhm.
kids, it kind of looks oh cutesy. But for adults, there was a thing.
Mhm.
Okay, fine. But I will be honest with you. I'm gonna be. It's not a big deal, but looking back now,
Mhm.
I personally, this is probably gonna not go the way you'll have a different idea. I personally don't feel as like icky about. I look at it and I'm like, you know what? There's an innocence and expressiveness. I know what you can probably, but I
Mhm.
don't feel, and even more so with 60s. I look at the 60s stuff. I'm like, you know what, man? That's. But at the time, that was probably thought of like clown stuff. Like people were dressed like clowns.
Well,
Probably.
yeah, a certain percentage of the population thought that yes, those are clowns. They're look at them, look
Yeah,
at them. They're
yeah,
dirty, they're nasty, they're filthy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, but to the people wearing that, it was like, let it all hang out. We don't care. This is anti-establishment. You say I have to have a crew cut. I'm not getting a crew cut. I'm letting my hair grow down to my shoulders. Oh, say, can you see my eyes? If you can, then my hair's too short, that kind of thing. So, but it was seen as rebellion. That was the rebellion against the establishment. We're not going to do this. No, we're doing it our way. But then that morphed, and I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it went there. But when I'm in my junior year of high school in math class, sitting next to a guy who's 5'9", red hair and freckles, with a fro, wearing 3-inch platform shoes and a polyester leisure suit in school with his top buttoned unbuttoned on the shirt and 1,500 gold chains there.
And
It's
a
like,
little red chest hair popping out.
the only thing he was missing was the disco ball, by the pencil sharpener. It's like, dude, this is school. Knock it off. It ain't Saturday Night Fever. Your name's Duffy, for crying out loud. Quit it. You know?
Hey
It,
man, take it easy. Go with the flow, man.
yeah, bam. Yeah. Says, I'm sure there are grandmas out there with tramp stamps and duct paste profile pics. Oh, yeah. You get into some of these timelines, it's going to get hilarious. It's going to get hilarious, Greg. Um, Jim Dockrell says there are for sure photos of grandmas in mini skirts and halter tops. Oh, yes. Definitely. Definitely for sure. And likely a very cool car, too. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
There was a little window when there was a little bit of cringiness when looking back at that area, more or less. But there's no compare. But again, like what you said, it could be in 2045. And people are like, you know what? This duck face thing, man, those people had it going on. They were
Well,
right.
that's expression. That is freedom. That is love for yourself. That exudes confidence. No, it's a 12-year-old, showing you her lipstick. Exactly. Come off it.
All right, I think that that's
Yeah,
well,
we need to land the plane.
well, at least that places us in a timeline,
Yeah.
us particularly.
Well, yeah, and I'm in that timeline. My place in that timeline is there's no photographic evidence of the stupid stuff I did when I was young. It's not like it is today where everybody has a camera handy with them 24/7. Because if there's no evidence that I did it, I didn't do it.
Hey, let me just tell you this one last thing. I got to tell you, the cringiest for me was it. Remember those parachute pants back in the day, like
Oh, yeah,
the
the
the break dancing and such and this and that.
MC Hammer Time pants, yeah.
Yeah, for some reason, I wanted them. They just it was so rad,
I
and
don't
I
believe
said
that for a minute.
no. I did. I just wanted them.
Yeah.
I wanted because they looked airy and they look man, that looks cool. Yes, I'm telling you. Even in
Okay.
the midst of all this other stuff, this rock, and my mom said, "Okay, son," and I went and bought and they were yellow, and they Aladdin
Mhm.
poofed out, and then they were freaking and I got home and I'm like, man, these freaking pants. This is and I put them on and I walked out the house and I was going to walk around the block and around Sweetwater and just just be cool
Yeah.
and enjoy
Cool.
myself. And I walked out the door and I started walking and I remember first time I did, as I walked out in public, I looked at those pants. I said, "This is the dumbest shit that I've ever decided on." I felt in one moment
Mhm.
like that ridiculous.
Mhm.
This didn't match me. It didn't.
Mhm.
I don't even know why I chose what I chose, but at that moment, I felt so ridiculous. You have no idea how ridiculous. I felt like deep and profound embarrassment. Yes,
Mhm.
and I turned around and never wore those pants. Like from that on, I was exploring fashion in that one instance because I usually wore jeans, and
That's all I wore.
I regretted it like that
Yeah.
one time.
Yeah. I don't have anything in my closet like that, I don't
How
think.
exaggerated was that, Mark? And it was
But it
yellow.
was at the time. It was at the time. I mean, I can't did you ever do the tennis headband?
Oh yeah, I had that.
Okay. I That was, a few years after my rebellious stage. With me, it was I don't know, I've been pretty plain and pretty damn boring my entire life. It's been blue jeans and when I say I explored fashion, it was the color of t-shirt I was wearing, man. It
But I
really
really went
was.
out, dude. I really thought
Mhm.
for some reason because I saw it was exciting. I was like, man, look at that's really. I just liked it. But
Mhm.
then I realized that no, that doesn't fit with me.
It's
That
good on
the way.
stage, you
Yeah,
know?
it's good on stage in that
Mhm.
context. I have nothing in
Yes.
association where that would be appropriate for me to. I
Mhm.
mean, at least to my sensibilities. But I
Yeah.
didn't know it until I made the mistake of buying it
Yeah.
and walking outside with it, and I realized, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's a way distant from what you should wear, and I
Mhm.
just stopped right there and then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wasted my mom's money, which is hurtful even to this day because man, I just it was my capricious sort of want. She indulged me, but I never wore it again, Mark.
Yeah. Well, I never bought anything like that I was embarrassed about. I did get some things as gifts. I can't even remember what they were, but it was one of those cases of my mother telling your grandmother's coming over. You better go put on those pants that she bought you. Do I got them, Mom? Yeah, go put them on. Okay. "Well, grandma, sure glad she got you those pants. It looks like you like them." "Yeah, thank you, grandma." And she left, and I couldn't get I'd never seen a zipper make sparks before. I couldn't get out of them fast enough. That kind of thing.
One time I got my cousin, because he was into rap.
Mhm.
He's a later generation, but he was into rap. And I said, oh, obviously he's into rap. Who's the hot and trendy thing? So I found this. It was for like his birthday or Christmas. I found this shirt, all black shirt with Tupac Shakur on it, like his
Mhm.
face right there, and a bandana. He's just staring at. And so I went to my aunt's house with the thing, and I gave him and happy birthday or holiday, and my little cousin, and everybody was standing there, and here, open it up, because I thought, man, he likes rap, like he's trying rap and this and that, and he pulls out the shirt, and there's Tupac, and my cousin, my other cousin, little girl cousin, just totally cracked up, and I realized in that moment, but I mean, she was practically pissing, and it was hilarious, and my cousin's, oh, I could tell
Mhm.
that just because
Thank
he
you.
so here's my thing. Here's my what I was observing. Just because he likes rap, it doesn't necessarily follow. It's
Mhm.
okay. It's like if I were to give you a Cher and Sonny and Cher
CD,
shirt,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
I know that you like rock and roll. So hey, Mark, here's a Sonny and Cher shirt. It's a classic. It was
Mhm.
that corny.
Yeah,
It was so out of place, and I realized I had lost connection at that point
yeah,
to societal norms.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I tell people proudly that I'm a cultural infidel. I don't know any of that stuff. I do know that when Steven Tyler was dressing that way to perform with Aerosmith, that was his look. It wasn't mine.
And that's a tough thing to sort of it really is. Any
I
of it.
had the self awareness to know that that's not my look. I'm not going to try to dress like that. You know, but
Yeah.
it's funny. Me, Linda, and our daughter Lee, when we were stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, we went into Nashville and were shopping. And it was, I don't want to say 8 or 9 at night. And we're just getting ready to head out to the car to go home. And we're heading for the exits of this department store. And in come like four guys. I swear to God, they stepped right out of a hair metal music video. They had the hair all teased up, and they had the leather with all the straps and the spandex pants and the whole thing. And it was like, what do you hear for more hairspray? What's going on, guys? You know, and they walked past us. This is Nashville, Tennessee. All right. They walked past us heading for whatever it was they were gonna get. And all three of us just didn't say a word. We just kind of followed them going through. And I was thinking, that's the look you were going for? You think that's the look? You did that on purpose?
So they're just relaxed, walking about, and
Yeah.
that's their natural getup.
I don't know. I don't know a thing about them, but it looked like, I kid you not, they had every accoutrement that you can think of for a hair metal band. They looked like they just stepped off of a set of a hair metal music video.
Human beings
But it
are
was friggin' funny. And it
well,
was
yeah.
took every fiber of my being to not laugh until we got out of the store and the doors closed. It was just friggin' hilarious because it was so out of place. This wasn't Los Angeles down close to the Troubadour. This was Nashville, the buckle on the Bible Belt. All right. George Jones is playing down the street.
Right. It just didn't. It didn't fit whatsoever in any context.
Anything. No.
And but did they do it right though? Like, did they actually look like a band?
They may have been a band for all I know. I wasn't into hair metal at the time. But
That's
I,
hilarious as hell.
it was just, huh?
Well, that's how you do to go get seen and all that jazz.
Well, they got seen. I'm here to tell you what, because we weren't the only ones that stopped and just followed them as they walked down the aisle. Yeah.
have to tell you this last one,
Yeah,
last final one.
then we really need to land the plane, but yeah.
So talking about fashions and that, my friends
Mhm.
came sometime in the '80s. My friends drove over to my house. Eloy, we're coming to pick you up. We got to make a quick pit stop. And I said, no, guys, I get. And they showed up, and then Eloy, what's up? They come into my room. Come on, let's go. We're all heading out, man. I'm like, no, guys, I don't have. The problem is, I don't. My pants are all dirty. I don't have pants. All I've got is these spandex biking short. You know the tight ones.
Yeah.
Um, Shorts and actually my shoes. I like I was at a stage where my shoes had broken down, and so I
Mhm.
all I had was cowboy boots. I said, "No, Eloy, come on!" And I said, "Look," I told him, "I'll go with you guys, but I'm not getting out of the car because I'm going to put on these boots with with these biking shorts
Mhm.
and this little tank top that I have.
Mhm.
Just start picturing that:
Mhm.
boots, tight little
Mhm.
spandex whatnots,
Mhm.
and the a tank top.
Uh-huh.
Probably it was probably fluorescent because it was back in the day."
Yeah.
So it was a combination on many levels. And by the way, I never used that combination. I didn't have any. It was like a Sunday or something, and there was a problem with the water. I don't remember the detail, but that's all I had.
Mhm.
And they said, "Oh, dude, just come on." So we get there. It's Miami. It's hot as hell.
Mhm.
It's my friend's house, and I'm like in the car, and they all get out, and like, "You gonna leave me in the car?" Because they were making a pit stop,
Mhm.
and it was too hot. And say, "Yeah, we got to stop because of X, Y, and Z." And so I said, he says, "Come on, Eloy, it's you're dressed like whatever, it doesn't matter." And I was like, "Okay." I get out with boots,
Mhm.
little tidy spandexy whatever, and a
Mhm.
tank top, and we walk up to my friend's house, and the door opens, and it's a burly Cuban father, like macho father, and he looks at all the friends, and then he looks at me, and he looks down, and he looks up at me, and I'm like, "Hi," dude. Dude, it looked bad. It looked bad. I felt so embarrassed. It's like, why did I do this? They freaking picked. Anyways, whatever. That's just an embarrassing moment. Who knows what that guy? He said, "Man, my son is hanging out with the wrong crowd."
Yep.
All right. In any event. Oh boy.
This is going to be interesting because a lot of the banners that I had in, yeah, a lot of the banners that I had in StreamYard, I don't have in this. So it's going to be up to Steve to post all the banners for me to highlight out here in the chat.
All right. So here we go. We're gonna start off. The first one we're gonna start off with is the channel. So we go live every Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time here on YouTube. Trampled Underfoot podcast on YouTube. Now we're going to transition over to the next one, which is the Trampled Underfoot podcast site over on Facebook, and you can go visit that. We usually post. Oh, look, how did that pop up?
Steve put it in the chat, so I highlighted it.
Oh, see how that works good.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we're over on Facebook, so check that out because we usually post stuff that we talk about here, whether videos or images or links or something or other like that. That's of interest with the show itself. And we're also we have our own website, which is trampledunderfootpodcast.com. You can go catch past episodes over there. You even download them if you'd like. And so finally, we are sponsored by.
Harneel Media. Thank you, Steve. He's always got our back, man. He's always got our back. If you're even toying with the idea of setting up a website, maybe you want a web store. You want to offer your products or your services to the public at large without paying commissions, without paying listing fees, etc., etc., etc. Best way to do that's with your own website. Steve over at Harneel Media can make sure that happens. So do yourself a favor. Get over to harneelmedia.com and click that contact us link and give Steve a shout. That's harneelmedia.com, HARNEAL media, sponsor of Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out with us. I couldn't read messages this time because I'm not um, added to this thing yet, but I will be next. I would assume that I will be able to see the chat.
The chat, you should be able to see it now. If you look over to the left video panel that we're on, you
Uh,
should have a tab up there that says comments.
oh, well, crap. This whole time I was okay. All right. Well, that solves that
It's
problem.
new software, folks. It's
Son of a gun. All right. So the whole time I was like, man, I wonder what people are saying. Like, you can't.
yeah.
Anyways, so look, be safe, do the things you love, and we'll catch you here next time. Till next time, peace out. We're out of here. Oh,
Have a good
actually,
one.
it's you.
Yeah.